Apologize for the late start. We're joined by the Bank of Canada, the Competition Bureau, and CSC today, and I thank you all for attending. And we'll start with a presentation from the Competition Bureau.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to appear here today. My name is Anthony Durocher, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Antitrust Practices at the Competition Bureau. I am with my colleagues Alexa Gendron-O'Donnell, who's Associate Deputy Commissioner, Economics Analysis. The Competition Branch is an organization that applies the independent legislation that ensures Canadian businesses and consumers prosper in a competitive and innovative marketplace. The Bureau administers and enforces Canada's Competition Act, which involves investigating and addressing abuses of market power, anti-competitive mergers, price fixing, and deceptive market practices. Competition law enforcement requires more than theory. Evidence-based enforcement is at the heart of what the Bureau does, and this requires that our decisions be based on credible evidence that can withstand judicial scrutiny. It is also important to recognize that we are enforcers, not adjudicators. The Competition Act requires us to meet several thresholds and standards, such as proving that there has been a significant harm to competition. Regardless of whether we want to bring a case forward, we are guided by the decisions of the Competition Tribunal and courts.
Read the news without seeing the increasing role of data in our economy. The power that data now represents and the control that digital platforms have over it deserves careful consideration. The Bureau recognizes its important role in this area and strives to be a leader through both its enforcement work and its policy work, both of which we plan to discuss today. We understand that this committee is particularly focused on privacy. It is important for me to say from the outset that safeguarding privacy is not an explicit goal under the Competition Act, so our role is limited in this regard. However, there are two ways that privacy can be relevant to our work. First, if companies compete to attract users by offering privacy protection, then this dimension of competition can be a relevant factor in reviewing any competitive activity. Second, if companies mislead consumers about whether and how their data will be used, then this may also raise concerns under the Competition Act. There are many obvious benefits associated with the collection and analysis of data, particularly for driving innovation, but there are also risks. The Bureau has a mandate to safeguard competition in the digital economy, and we continue to prioritize this work. However, it is important to acknowledge that competition law has its limits. It is not a cure-all for the broader threats that data and data-driven platforms may pose for society, such as breaches of privacy, election tampering, or manipulation of public opinion. These risks go beyond our legal mandate. Nevertheless, we are happy to bring our competition expertise to bear on this important discussion, as these issues are cross-cutting and will benefit from collaboration across government to protect Canadians. A little over a year ago, the Bureau published a comprehensive white paper entitled Big Data and Innovation: Implications for Competition Policy in Canada. The purpose of this paper was to engage with stakeholders by prompting a discussion on how the emergence of big data should affect competition law enforcement. Following an extensive consultation, the Bureau found that there's no need for hasty moves in this area. The current framework is up to the task. But our tools must evolve. They must evolve to deal with the complex issues arising from digital platforms, such as those that monetize user data through advertising by offering free services to consumers. A recurring concern we hear about is the large and growing size of some tech firms. But big doesn't necessarily mean bad. Becoming big is the reward a firm could get for successfully introducing an innovative product. We should not punish this success. Only when we find evidence that a big firm is engaging in harmful anti-competitive conduct should we intervene. It is important to find the right balance between preventing anti-competitive behavior that harms Canadian consumers and avoiding undue over-enforcement and the inadvertent harm that this may cause to innovation and the economy. Some of the issues that we have heard relating to the digital economy and our monitoring include firms buying emerging competitors or excluding disruptive ones, firms that may use artificial intelligence or algorithms to collude and fix prices, and firms misleading consumers about whether and how their data will be used. If we find evidence that any of these practices violate the Competition Act, the Bureau will act to protect Canadians. We have already conducted several notable investigations in the digital economy, including against Google over an alleged abuse of market power related to its search engine, and the Toronto Real Estate Board, or TREB, over its real estate data. Our case against TREB is a great example. We were able to stop TREB from withholding its real estate data from agents who wanted to offer innovative online services to home buyers and sellers. This case exemplifies how we are ensuring that Canadian consumers benefit from the innovation happening in the digital economy. We welcome the opportunity to discuss the Bureau's white paper as well as these recent cases in greater detail during the question and answer. L'économie numérique est l'une des grandes priorités du Bureau.
The digital economy is a top priority for the Bureau. We will continue to monitor the online marketplace, including the conduct of large tech firms. We will also continue to work closely with our domestic and international partners and carefully review the actions taken by our international counterparts. However, laws and competitive dynamics may differ significantly between countries, and we must remain mindful of that. The Bureau also encourages all Canadians to reach out to us if they have any evidence of violations of the Competitions Act. Before fielding your questions, I would note that the law requires the Bureau to conduct investigations in private and keep confidential the information we have. This obligation may prevent us from discussing some past or current investigations. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss our work, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Segment, our next presentation will come from the Communications Security Establishment. You've got 10 minutes. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dan Rogers, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Foreign Signals Intelligence at the Communications Security Establishment, and I'm responsible for CSE's Foreign Signals Intelligence Program. I'm joined today by my colleague, André Boucher, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Operations at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which is a part of CSE, is Canada's national authority on cybersecurity and cyber threat response. It's a pleasure to appear before you as you continue your study. With regard to the incident involving Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, CSE does not have a mandate to regulate social media, nor is it a law enforcement agency. We have no oversight role with respect to these companies. We do, however, have a role in identifying and helping protect against cyber threats to Canada's democratic process. As such, I'd like to focus my remarks on these threats and how they can be mitigated through good cyber and physical security. I also hope to leave you with a better sense of what CSE does and how we have changed as an organization since CSE officials last appeared before this committee in 2017. CSE is Canada's National Signals Intelligence Agency for Foreign Intelligence and the technical authority for cybersecurity and information assurance. I'd like to emphasize that CSE only directs its signals intelligence activities at foreign communications. CSE is prohibited by law from directing its activities at Canadians anywhere or at anyone in Canada. CSE operates at the cutting edge of today's threat environment, whether providing intelligence on a foreign-based terrorism or threats to Canadians abroad or defending against cyber attacks. CSE helps to ensure Canada's prosperity, security, and stability. More recently, CSE was asked to assist the Minister of Democratic Institutions with her mandate to lead the Government of Canada's efforts to defend the Canadian electoral process. Specifically, the mandate letter for the Minister of Democratic Institutions directed that she ask CSE to, 1, analyze risks to Canada's political and electoral activities from hackers and to release this assessment publicly, and to offer advice to Canada's political parties and Elections Canada on best practices when it comes to cybersecurity. In response, we released a report on cyber threats to Canada's democratic process in June of 2017. While the report is unclassified, key judgments in the assessment rely on multiple sources, including classified information from CSE's unique cybersecurity and foreign intelligence expertise. CSE examined cyber threat activity against democratic processes across Canada at the federal, provincial, and territorial and municipal levels and around the world. The report examined the types of threat actors involved, the targets they are likely to select, and the methods they may use to target their victims. CSE assessed that in the 2015 Canadian federal election, Canada's democratic process was targeted by low-sophistication cyber threats, likely perpetrated by hacktivists and cyber criminals. These activities had no effect on the results of the election and no impact on the privacy of Canadians. CSE has assessed that at the federal level, political parties and politicians and traditional and social media are more vulnerable to cyber threats than election activities themselves. Consistent with the increasing cyber threat activity against democratic processes worldwide, we expect to see multiple hacktivist groups deploying cyber capabilities in an attempt to influence the democratic process during the 2019 federal election. These will likely be low sophistication activities, but will be well planned and will target more than one aspect of the democratic process. CSE has been asked to continue this analysis and expects to release an update to the 2017 report. While offering mitigation advice was outside the scope of the threat report, to respond to Minister Gould's second request of CSE, CSE has held briefings with political parties, provincial and territorial clerks, and Elections Canada to offer best practices when it comes to cybersecurity. Our key message in all of these briefings is that while system safeguards are expected to curtail most suspected malicious activity, we cannot rely solely on technical safeguards. Users must also be diligent and have good cybersecurity habits in order to stop the threats of today and to stay ahead of the threats of tomorrow. CSE has made available on its website several documents on the top 10 IT security actions, cyber hygiene guide, mobile security for IT enterprise, and other resources with user best practices. We'd be happy to speak to any of these in greater detail during the question and answer. However, cybersecurity is a team sport. We'll continue to work with Elections Canada to ensure that electoral processes are secure and remains a trusted aspect of our democratic process. CSE will work with Minister Gould and other stakeholders, if requested, to advance the goal of protecting Canada's democratic institutions and electoral processes from cyber threats. On October 1st, the Minister of National Defence announced the launch of the Cyber Centre, Canada's national authority on cybersecurity and on cyber threat response. The Cyber Centre, housed at CSE, brings together cyber expertise from Public Safety Canada, Shared Services Canada, and CSE all under one roof. A unified government source of expert advice and guidance for the private sector, critical infrastructure, owners and operators, and all Canadians, the Cyber Centre will help ensure a safe and secure cyberspace. This newly established centre will also enable better coordination of efforts in the protection of Canada's democratic institutions from cyber threats, including in advance of the 2019 federal election. Again, thank you for inviting us here today, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks very much. And our last presentation will come from Eric Santor of the Bank of Canada. Thanks very much for joining us today, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good day, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. As the Managing Director of the Canadian Economic Analysis Department at the Bank of Canada, I'm happy to present our views and observations regarding the declining competition in advanced economies. I'll also address the implications for both competition and the longer-term dynamism of the economy related to the emergence of large tech firms, as well as the growing importance of big data. Understanding the impact of digitalization on the Canadian economy is crucial as we seek to achieve our objective of low, stable, and predictable inflation. The Bank of Canada does not have a regulatory role with respect to the privacy of citizens' data, so I trust you understand that I will not be able to address the privacy implications of these issues. The Canadian economy is digitalizing rapidly. Digital disruption is expected to be positive for economic progress overall. New firms are being created, and existing ones are being transformed as new technologies change the way businesses operate. For consumers, digitalization means that households can purchase a seemingly ever-widening range of goods and services 24/7 from around Canada and from around the world. La numérisation contribuera à faire augmenter la productivité.
Digitization will contribute to higher productivity and hence higher living standards in the coming years and decades. There's a lot of concern about the rise of the robots and how they could take away people's jobs. Naturally, we tend to focus on these initial effects, but we also need to be mindful that it takes a long time to fully replace a worker with a robot.
It is time for society to adjust. People whose jobs are affected will need support. Job training and a strong safety net are key. We must also remember that digitalization is creating new kinds of jobs, and will create some that haven't even been imagined yet. These new jobs will help the economy grow. New jobs mean new incomes, which will be spent not just in the digital economy, but across the whole economy, which benefits workers and traditional jobs too. One of the driving technologies of digitalization is the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning in conjunction with big data to a wide range of business applications. AI/ML increases firms' productivity in three major ways. First, they help companies make better products and improve their customers' experiences. Second, they help develop products and services more efficiently and more quickly. And finally, they help firms reach new markets and customers. Les applications de ces technologies sont
There are practically countless examples of applications of this kind. They include farmers using GPS autopilots to drive their tractors and optimize fertilizer and pesticide use. Robots working on factory floors and in warehouses, driving, as it were, forklifts to move goods and digitally track them from supplier to retailer. AI offering up suggestions for products or services you may wish to buy, and having chatbots and robo-advisors standing ready to answer your questions when you visit websites.
With big data, firms can gain competitive advantage, ultimately through offering a better product or service at a lower price. One of the features of AI/ML, big data network effects, is that there are significant benefits often to being a first mover. In fact, market concentration happens quite naturally in industries with prominent network effects and other scale economies. In the current environment, this dynamic can lead to the creation of superstar firms. These firms tend to have fewer employees than conventional companies, and they often earn impressive monopoly profits. What is new is that the winner-takes-all effect is magnified in the digital economy because user data have become another source of monopoly power, potentially. Data from a large network create a formidable barrier to entry in some cases. Another barrier to entry can come from firms using their position as gatekeepers to crucial online services to impede their competitors and thwart innovation. In this context, we believe competition policy can be modernized appropriately to help ensure that the benefits of digitalization are fully realized. So what do we know? What evidence do we have of the issue of market concentration, markup, and prices? In recent years, economists have paid considerable attention to the secular rise in market concentration in advanced economies. In particular, models have been developed that tie this rise to digitalization. Specifically, these firms are able to capture an increasingly large share of the market because of technological advances such as AI/ML with big data, thereby increasing concentration. They also have a high share of profits, which can lead to a fall in the labor shortage of income. Overall, most industries have seen an increase in their concentration over the last 15 years. While the evidence is not conclusive, a broad increase of industry concentration across countries suggests that technological change, that is, i.e. digitalization, rather than country-specific factors, perhaps is the main driver. One concern in an environment dominated by superstar firms is that those firms that have more power when setting prices, which could lead to an increase in prices. That's why economists have also been looking at the secular rise in market power of firms as measured by markups. For example, researchers documented a rise in average markups in the U.S. from 1980 to 2014. They also find that global markets have risen as well. And this is also observed in Canada. For Canada, they document a very similar overall trend to the U.S., a finding confirmed by the IMF. This suggests that market power has been rising in many countries over the past few decades. Of course, the next question then is whether digitalization has affected consumer prices. This is often referred to as the Amazon effect, where competition from digital retailers results in lower prices. It may appear inconsistent that digitalization can lead to both higher markups and lower prices. However, it is simply that the benefits of technology partly go to the customer in the form of lower prices, but also to the firm in the form of higher markup over lower cost. While the direct evidence of the impact of digitalization on inflation is mixed, it does tend to point to downward pressure overall. In a research paper published last year, bank staff found that direct evidence pointed to a small negative impact of digitalization on inflation. That is, digitalization was weighing on price increases rather than feeding them. Evidence using online prices data, such as the Billion Prices Project, is mixed. Some find that online prices tend to behave similarly to brick-and-mortar store prices, where others find actually big effects on inflation year over year on the downward side. Most of us are familiar about why this might be happening: the ability to check competitors' prices using our smartphones before we head to the checkout. And finally, when using the framework upon which the bank's main economic models are built to assess the channels through which digitalization may affect inflation, we find that most developments associated with digitalization would put downward pressure on inflation. Overall, the impact of digitalization on market concentration and hence competition nevertheless remains an open question. And the bank will continue to examine the impact of digitalization on the Canadian economy as we pursue our objective of promoting the economic and financial welfare of Canada. Merci encore de votre invitation.
Thanks once again for the invitation to appear.
For your presentations, we'll go to our 7-minute round first, and the first 7 minutes goes to Mr. Saini.
Good morning. Thank you, all of you being here. I can't resist to ask this question to Mr. Santor because inflation might not be a really trendy topic, but I know that central bankers worldwide have pursued a inflationary rate target of being less than 2%. But now you're bringing retailers into the mix, and they have two models: one bricks and mortars and one online. And there is a price differential. I've seen it myself when you go to store, and some of these products are not calculated in your consumer price index. So how does the bank, or how do you make an accurate measurement of what's actually happening in the marketplace? Because the marketplace itself has changed.
Right. So our mandate is to target inflation at 2% with a range of 1 to 3%. The CPI itself is constructed by Statistics Canada, and so you would need to direct your question towards them to ask whether or not the CPI is reflecting these developments. I know that they are aware of this issue, and so this is something that's certainly on their agenda.
Does it not make it difficult for you then when you do your assessments?
So what we do observe is the CPI, and that does have both online and store brick and mortars prices in it, and so we observe this. Since we know that online prices would be putting downward pressure on bricks and mortar prices, that would be already embedded in the CPI as that competition effect feeds through. And so when we talk to firms in our surveys, they tell us, yes, we are feeling pressure, downward pressure on their prices from online competition. So that is captured to some extent.
Okay. So, Mr. Rogers, I'm going to spend some time with you this morning. How would you assess the current threat level to the Canadian democratic process, specifically the 2019 election? Because in your opening comments, you talked about 2015, where there was low-level activity, but now we're in 2019. Obviously, there are more actors that are on the stage. Where would you assess our threat level right now?
Happy to take the question, and thank you. That is something that the last report touched on, and I know that our Cyber Center is preparing a new report that will touch on that topic. Maybe I can ask Andre to pick that up.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, le rapport de juin 2017.
The June 2017 report had already indicated that we expected an increase in the use of cyberspace for threats, in fact. We have an updated report which is slated to be released next year. If I may come out ahead of the report a little bit, according to the 2017 report, there are more threats, and in fact, the speed at which these threats are increasing is quick. We expected it to increase, but it's increasing faster than we expected. We're seeing it internationally and in Canada.
Is there any risk that Canadian voter lists could be compromised, or the list of of those of Canadian political parties? And we saw an example of that in the 2016 election with the DNC and with the Clinton campaign. Where are we at with that now?
Oui, merci pour cette question. En fait, c'est quelque chose auquel on est...
Thank you for the question. That is something we're very alert to. We've seen what happened on the international stage, and we started working very quickly with people from Elections Canada to make sure that systems and procedures are put in place and were and had the capacity to face the oncoming threat. So I have every confidence that voter lists will be adequately protected by the measures and technology in place and the processes that are in place, combined, of course, with what we have now. It's enough, we believe.
I don't want to mention any names, but obviously there are certain state actors around the world that have been known to engage in activity to disrupt elections. But one of the things that concerns me is that sometimes the state actors don't come forward themselves. They have other entities, other organizations, other groups that act on their behalf to disrupt not only elections but other activities in another country. And I don't want you to compromise your tactics of how you deal with this, but how do we deal with that? Because it seems to me it's such a problem, such great proliferation. How do we deal with that? You have certain entities that you are aware of, that you know, and you're known to be aware of those entities. But then they have so many sub entities that work at an arm's length process that can contribute to the disruption of a campaign. What way will you manage that?
En fait, si vous...
If you turn to the June 2017 report, the threats were categorized in a number of groups, but given your specific question, we are seeing a synchronization of the outsourcing among states and among criminal elements. We look at all threats, and prevention, detection, and response measures are established on the basis of individual groups, not only on the basis of dominant groups. On the cybersecurity side, we are extremely alert to all groups. We are observing that there's forms of connectivity that didn't exist in the past. Some people are employed by others and become threats. Some groups are employed and become threats. Some appear to be executing a contract and acting legally, but are in fact acting for other parties. That is a genuine phenomenon. We do what we can. We do everything we can.
At a time is that obviously now there's different ways of communicating with the public, and we use social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Do you work with them in any concerted way to make sure that if there are threats that are emanating, that they can be shut down really quickly so they don't proliferate to an extent which can have a material impact on an issue or a campaign, whether it be bots or trolls or misinformation that's put out there? Do you have a relationship with them? Because for me, I think that would be critical to making sure that misinformation is not being spread online?
Absolument. Le Centre canadien en cybersécurité.
Absolutely. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity uses and founds its activities on a cooperative model, which goes from manufacturers to users to people who produce source codes and software and service operators. The service operator also has a social responsibility. We treat them as Canadians, so if we discover that something is happening that's unusual, we engage them immediately. If they hadn't detected the problem, they're very receptive to taking measures. Thank you.
But we'll give him 7 minutes just before he does.
And I appreciate that, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you to all for appearing this morning. And I recognize that the Competition Bureau and the bank have only peripheral suggestions that might be applied in the recommendations that we make to government on completion of this report on the digital vulnerability of the Canadian electoral, threats to the security of the Canadian electoral system. So I'd like to direct all of my time to the CSE witnesses today. As a politician, I participate in social media almost entirely for political benefit, and there are significant benefits to use Facebook, Instagram, other social media, Twitter. But this week, the digital threat was brought home to me when my Instagram account was seized by someone outside of the country. My Facebook account was hacked and took some time to be recovered. And it brought to mind the so-called Beyoncé trick, which previous witnesses have spoken to before the committee, wherein in the United States, the last federal election, a Facebook fan page was created paying tribute to Beyoncé, which accumulated millions of followers. And then in the final days of the election campaign, messages, and this was set up, we understand, by Russian players at one level or another. And then in the final days of the campaign, messaging went out, which in the end was aimed at discouraging, it's been concluded, it was aimed at discouraging black voters from participating, from voting in that campaign or in some of the campaigns. One of our previous witnesses, Dr. Ben Scott, when we asked about how Canadians might protect themselves from this sort of Trojan horse social media time bomb set to go off in the decision-making period in an election campaign, what's the defense? And he suggested that agencies like the CSE would be playing what he called red teaming, Cold War game playing in trying to anticipate threats, how one would respond to threats, how one would see this as a fraudulent attempt to interfere with the election process, and essentially said that security agencies have an ability, and I recognize you have no authority over social media, but he suggested certainly American security agencies have an ability to see foreign intervention or foreign players in the social media sphere. And I'm just wondering if you could address what the CSE is doing in that area.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for the question. And I'll answer from the foreign intelligence perspective, which is in my domain, and then I'll invite Andre to talk to some of the guidance that we provide to Canadians to deal with that sort of issue. As a foreign intelligence mandated organization, we do track targets on the global information infrastructure, which includes social media. So if we have intelligence priorities from the government, that would include things like looking at foreign nations that would have an interest in disrupting our electoral systems, we would look anywhere on the global information infrastructure to identify what those activities, capabilities, and intentions of those foreign states are. So I can't in the setting speak to the details of how we do that, but I can definitely say that it is an active part of our role to observe that activity to the extent that we can. And then we roll that up into foreign intelligence products to provide to our partners in the government and to Andre's team, which forms the basis of some of their cybersecurity advice and their work with those who may be affected by their activities. Andre, did you want to?
Absolutely. So, of course, we already provide advice and guidance on how to secure the device, the utilization of devices, and so on and so forth. So I'll leave that outside. But just to follow on to Dan's point, when the teams are informed that there's activity in foreign space, I think it goes back to the previous question. There's the opportunity for us. So if you know, whichever company is actually, we would tell the user to contact the company and let them know. But because we have these partnerships as well, we would also inform the company that we're seeing evidence that something is wrong with their service delivery and they perhaps want to turn their attention to it. So what we try to do is get this information in the right way to those that actually can do something about it.
Well, and this study, the study we've conducted this year since the Cambridge Analytica Facebook Aggregate IQ scandal broke, involves a significant amount of testimony that the big data companies have been more preoccupied in developing their business plans and profits and competition rather than on the protection of privacy. In your experience, in your dealings with, and you don't have to necessarily name the companies, but in offering advice to the big data companies, and I would, for our viewing audience, I'd suggest Facebook, Amazon, Google, and so forth. Have they been cooperative in terms of responding to your advice?
La réponse très courte, ça serait oui.
The very short answer would be yes. But so I can give you some background, we have to be pragmatic. When I meet a CEO or something like that to establish security measures, be it in the private sector or to preserve privacy or network availability, there's a balance to be struck for the service provider between profitability so that there's a usable product and to make sure it's a secure product. When I come into the room and ask them to provide maximum security, be it a product or service or whatever, I have to provide some convincing arguments, and to do that it helps to have good information that we can provide. We can say, you are a target for these and these threats, so you need to increase your security measures, and that works very well.
Oh, thank you very much.
Our next 7 minutes will go to MP Matheson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for being here. This is a wealth of information, and I truly appreciate it. Some of it is a tad terrifying, but I'm sure that we'll sift through that and determine how best to tackle this very large question. I wanted to begin, and I think it's probably Mr. DeRocher who could best answer this. Yesterday, there was a lawsuit filed against Facebook, and the allegation is that they manipulated the numbers in regard to how many people were watching videos on their network. And of course, there's implications for those who work in media, the people who write for media outlets, and also advertisers. I wondered, would you regard this as an abuse of market power, and does it have broader implications in regard to that question?
So thank you very much for the question. Canada's Competition Act, in terms of the abuse of market power provisions, are really aimed at dominant companies that engage in action that harms the competitive process. So that is intended to keep competitors out of the market from competing on the merits with them. So an instance of a firm that may be engaging in conduct that would be tantamount to exercising market power, such as raising prices, that does not necessarily fall offside of the Competition Act. It's really geared towards protecting the competitive process. And in the context of conversations around, the large tech companies, really our role is to ensure that the competitive process is protected, and that companies are afforded the opportunities to compete with Facebook on the merits of their products and services.
Okay, thank you. I wondered in terms of, obviously, Facebook benefits by the number of people watching and using it in terms of selling advertising, and so it seemed interesting in regard to this lawsuit. So thank you for that. And I'd like to go to the Bank of Canada. I wonder, does the bank have any concerns about concentration of superstar firms? You described that, and most of these are in the United States. Does this impact on the ability of Canadians to build first-rate domestic digitalized business space, and apart from that, the impact on retailers?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a good question. What I could say is what we're seeing right now in the Canadian economy is that firms, there's a lot of activity in the digital economy. While we don't have a explicit measure of the digital economy, what we know that the things that we do look at show that there's very robust growth. And so taking one measure, for example, if you look at GDP by industry, there's a category called computer systems design related services. It's been growing more than 7% a year for the last 5 years. In value-added space, it's as big as autos and aerospace combined. And so it's very rapid growth, a lot going on. And if you look more anecdotally in centers in Toronto, Montreal, Waterloo Corridor, Edmonton, other places, a lot of digital activity, a lot of investment going on in IP and research and development. And one gets the sense that this has attracted interest of large players to bring FDI into Canada, with them locating here, and so to benefit from the talent pool that we have in terms of big data, AI, ML, and a lot of artificial intelligence. Canada's the third by one metric, has the third largest number of researchers in AI, ML. And so we're well positioned to take advantage of this, and so we see this as a really strong driver of the Canadian economy right now.
So the brain drain that we always seem to fear is not a reality. We are indeed attracting and keeping highly skilled professionals.
Yes, it's a very competitive job market for data scientists and people who are conversant in AI, ML, but we're very well positioned. We produce a lot of talent ourselves, and we're attracting talent as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Durocher, the European Union has taken the proactive approach to antitrust enforcement against dataopolies, such as Google. And I wondered, can you explain the difference between the Canadian and the European approaches to that?
Sure. Thank you very much. That's an important thing, and I can tell you the Competition Bureau is very closely monitoring what is going on in Europe and elsewhere around the world, because when we look at these large companies, this is a global issue, and it's not Canada specific. And an important thing is that we work together, and we're aware of what is going on elsewhere, what tools they're using, to make sure that here in Canada we're using cutting edge methods. So no secret that the European Union has brought 2 cases against Google. There's also recently announced an investigation against Amazon. The German Competition Authority has an ongoing case against Facebook as well. And what I can tell you is the important thing to be mindful of is the difference not only in competitive dynamics between Europe and Canada, but also in the laws. So Canada's abuse of dominance law is well established since 1986 with jurisprudence about what are the elements that need to be met to bring a case. So all the work that we do is really principled evidence-based enforcement, and our decisions in Canada are really informed by the evidence at hand and any harm to the Canadian market. So with respect to Google in particular, in 2016, we closed a very lengthy 3-year investigation against Google for some of its practices. And there was a commitment provided by Google for a competition issue that we had identified. But going forward, we are closely monitoring and working with our international counterparts to ensure that here in Canada, we are staying on top of things.
Thanks very much. Our last 7 minutes goes to Mr. Picard.
Le Bureau de la concurrence.
My question is for the Competition Office. In a hypothetical situation, if Facebook hands over a significant amount of data to an analyst, and that second party undertakes an agreement with a third party which has no control over what it is doing, there will then be no control over the information. Now, does that third party which gets hold of information, is that third party considered to be acting in an anti-competitive fashion since it obtained the data under an agreement which was either concealed or criminal? Let's say that the second party did not have the right to sell the data. Thank you for that question. If I may, I will continue in English.
The sections that my colleagues spoke about also has what we call a false or misleading representation section. And when I talk about representation here, I really mean marketing material, online advertisements, social media messages, even the terms and conditions. So the big thing here under the Competition Act is that the general impression that you are conveying with those, you have to be truthful. Truth in advertising when it comes to promoting your business interest or collecting consumer information, you must be truthful about that. So that is the section of the Act that would be engaged when any company is thinking about making some kind of a representation to a consumer, whether that's to sell them a product or to give them what I would call a free product, but in exchange for their information. So you must abide by the Act in those terms.
Mais le réseau social qui demande.
But the social network that asks me to enter my information as I register is extremely transparent. Our society and our partners then end up with a right to use your data. We give them that right, but I don't know who their partners are. That is correct. So
the misleading advertising provisions for us, we encourage companies to be clear, but the biggest thing is to not mislead. You cannot tell consumers that you are going to do one thing and then do another. So really the competition provisions are about ensuring that there is truthful advertising to these customers so that customers know when they are about to purchase that product or give that information that there may be a possibility that it goes to a third party or that it is used elsewhere.
But they don't take responsibility of the partner's business. They don't take a responsibility of what the partner is going to do with the data they are exchanging with this partner. So I agree to exchange with my social media and the partner does something totally different. I'm going to address to the CST afterward, but it's all written in the contract and it's transparent and there's no misleading. It's just omission. There's a big difference with misleading in your case?
So again, the big thing with the Commission is just ensuring that that representation that is made to the customer is truthful. That is really the core of the law there. And certainly if that secondary company, if at any point they are making a representation to consumers, they absolutely have to ensure that that is truthful.
Thank you. At CSC, we have in mind that a third party in a scenario, you have millions of data. And you mentioned that the threat is increasing, especially for 2019. Can you identify the nature of the threat? Is it more individual, institution or association, corporation or government, or all the three first under the government umbrella?
Yeah. Did you want to?
Foreign government.
Upcoming threat report?
Oui. Ce que je pourrais donner comme...
What I might answer is that we mustn't lose sight of the fact that threats fall into a range of categories. So, in fact, threats are categorized. We look at them under those categories. The categories inform us as to the measures that the threats are based on, and our responses are based on that. But normally, CSE focuses on foreign sources, non-Canadian sources. But in intelligence, a signal has no citizenship. So a signal that comes from abroad, we don't know who's on the keyboard. It might be a Canadian or a foreigner, or the keyboard may be Canadian with a foreigner behind it. How can you make that distinction? And how can we make sure that it's not genuinely, or that it is genuinely a foreign signal or not? Because at some point you'll have to take action.
So you're absolutely right. CSE by mandate and by law can't direct its activities at Canadians anywhere or anyone in Canada. So absolutely, our Foreign Signals Intelligence Program is very much directed at foreign communications. I can't get into the very specifics of the way we do that, but certainly I can say that where we do collect information, it's in accordance with Government of Canada's set priorities. And for us, that means, we will start from a foreign end for any intelligence activities. And from that foreign end, we develop our intelligence products. So we start from places where we are able to identify a foreign nexus to something and then evaluate from there. We never start from a Canadian end or an unknown end that is not clearly tied to a Government of Canada intelligence priority or a foreign organization or individual.
When an entity tries to target our democracy, the process in general, voting system, you either attack someone for the person to lose because his or her policies will go against your interests, or you go for someone who will support, and in exchange, there's no free ride here, that someone has to pay something in return. Once you have identified the attack itself, do you go further saying what's behind the whole thing, what's behind the scene to see what justifies this kind of attacks?
Yes, so what we produce intelligence on is exactly what the government requests, and in the Act that's defined as the capabilities, intentions, I don't want to get the words wrong, but we look at the capabilities, activities, and motivations of foreign states. That's included in a part of foreign intelligence. So we'll seek to find as much rich information about that we can to provide to government or other partners who can take action to respond. So
is this involved then in that?
Certainly we work with CSIS, we work with Global Affairs Canada, the RCMP, and other domestic partners. Within their mandates, they'll use our information.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And we move to the 5 minutes, the first 5 minutes to Mr. Gord.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question will be to the CSE. In an election campaign that lasts approximately 35 to 40 days, and given all the digital data that can now come in from platforms, if an attack is perceived, how quickly can you respond and help Elections Canada? 2 or 3 days to spot the attack or to issue a report, but in that time, harm is being done. So what can you do to secure things? Thank you. That's an excellent question. In fact, CSE defends the Canadian government already. We've had to learn to face such threats over the years, and you're right in saying that if it took us 2 days to respond, we wouldn't be doing very well. We have systems that work at cyber speed. They detect threats as they happen. And that applies to Elections Canada as well. We have been working with Elections Canada for 2 or 3 years. We are working on protecting their systems. We have the tools. We have processes. So if a threat is detected, the response happens within minutes, not hours or days. But you're talking about what is within the Elections Canada system. I'm talking about fake news circulating on a platform, misinformation. So checking that takes time. Fact-checking takes time, but the harm is done. We've seen that happen a great deal in the United States. Fake news, when you announce fake news, it takes days. Is there anything we can do to ward that off, or do we simply have to live with it? Our cybersecurity mandate allows us to, well, prevention is the best we can do. Prevention to make sure that people are not put in a threatened or position. I think your argument is extremely valid, but once the threat is manifest, the Cybersecurity Centre can no longer do much about it. What are your limitations if Parliament were to amend some telecommunications legislation to change the limits. If there's an attack in Canada, there are limitations as to what you can do. I'm not an expert on legislation. I can tell you that under the current legislation, evidence shows that we have managed to combine people and systems very well and have managed to defend the Government of Canada very effectively. I hope you find that reassuring. So Canadians can have confidence in their democratic processes during the next election, given how things have been around the world in the past 4 or 5 years. I am fully confident in the fact that Canadians will be able to trust their democratic processes. That is the message I send to my children. Go vote and have confidence. Trust. Our democratic process is sound. Thank you.
Goes to Ms. Vanderbilt.
Thank you very much. My first question is for Mr. Rogers and Mr. Boucher. Going back to the idea of who is being targeted, you had mentioned, I believe, Mr. Rogers, that it's more the politicians than the elections themselves that are the targets. Do you also find that female candidates and female politicians are being targeted more?
I can't say that in my experience I know that to be true or false. I don't know, Andre, whether you have a sense of that.
En fait, l'étude n'est pas si...
The study is not as detailed as that. When we look at the problem as a whole, what we saw is that in the democratic process, the Election Canada side and the machinery had was quite solid, but on the other side, investment was needed in political parties and the media. There was a lot of space there, and investment was significant and important.
Women and female candidates that are targeted, more particularly through the social media platforms. So some gender disaggregated data might be useful to the committee at some point. I also have a question for Mr. Santor, and this has to do with our ability to really regulate our currency, because data itself is becoming a currency. We've seen the exchange. You get a free coffee if you give us your email address. And then, of course, the data amalgamators at a large scale, buying and selling this data has become a currency in itself. And then we saw in our study of Cambridge Analytica and SCL that they were actually, in some of the data that was found online, starting to work on a Midas token, a cyber currency. So what is the threat if we start looking at data as currency globally and being paid for potentially through one of these cyber currencies? Does this undermine our ability to be able to regulate our monetary system?
No, I don't think that it does. I mean, it's a very interesting question that I'm certain that we'll need to be looking at as digitalization proceeds in many different dimensions. But we have full faith and confidence in our currency, and but this is certainly something that we'd be thinking about.
Okay, well, that's very good to know. I'd also like to go to the competition issue and whether or not, as legislators, our purpose is legislating. And with regard to the Competition Act, Mr. Santor, you had said that our competition policy doesn't need to be modified, it just needs to have some additional tools. Although I think I heard Mr. Durocher, you had made some indication that we do need to have some sort of changes in terms of our Competition Act. Did I understand that correctly?
In fact, I think it was my opening statement that referred to following our study on the matter, we determined that there was no, that the current framework was up to the task. What really matters is the tools that we use. But I will preface my answer by saying that the Competition Bureau does not have the mandate to review competition policy. Our job is the enforcement side. Innovation, Science and Economic Development now has the competition policy function. But certainly our foremost priority is to make sure that we have the tools to handle the digital economy, and we're seeing new issues come up, and that's our focus, and that's why we're very much prioritizing consulting and staying on top of developments nationally and internationally.
Because we've heard of a lot of these social media platforms like Facebook being called dataopolies. I think Mr. Santos said superstar platforms. The fact is that people don't really have a choice. If they're on Facebook and all of their data is on Facebook, their photos, all of their family, all their connections, their networks, to go off of Facebook and go to another platform, as long as that data is kept by Facebook, is very difficult for people because it's become a very important part of our social norm. So they essentially have become monopolies. And so my question, I guess, is whether or not the current tools that we have in the legislation are sufficient in order to be able to deal with that new kind of monopoly, which is these large data platforms.
I mean, Canada's current competition framework is really not meant to penalize monopolies per se. The competitive process ensures that firms that are innovating and investing and giving consumers a desirable product should not be punished for that. Our job is to ensure that these markets remain contestable through competition on the merits, and that firms, small or existing or nascent, are afforded the opportunity to compete on the merits of their products and services that they're providing to users. But certainly, we're mindful of what's going on internationally on this front too, and we did note that the GDPR has a data portability provision in it, which is noteworthy from a competition perspective as well. And our focus remains ensuring that we have the cutting edge tools to work with this. And our very broad consultation with our data paper, we consulted with the business community, the legal community, and the academic community. And there are no, answers on this. There's no silver bullet, but we are confident that we have the tools to deal with it. We're going to keep them up to date.
Thanks very much. So our next 5 minutes will be shared with Mr. Kesteren and Mr. Gore, but Mr. Van Kesteren first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here. I'm not normally a member of this committee, but I did serve, as a matter of fact, when I was first elected back 12 years ago on this committee, so it's kind of a homecoming for me. The assumption, I think, of most Canadians would be that the communication security establishment is well trusted. I think we believe in our Canadian institutions, and I would go along with that. I think you're doing a great job. I'm curious, how many people work for your agency?
I think at this point it's somewhere around the order of 2,500.
How many?
2,500.
2,500. That's a pretty good number, but when one looks at the NSA, for instance, in the United States, and looks at, first of all, just the enormity of their buildings, and they have thousands upon thousands and thousands. I don't think that too many, as I said in my opening remarks, most people would trust your organization, but what assurances do we have that organizations like the NSA, Zuckerberg was just in front of the Congress a short number of months ago, and there were some real charges laid before that there was collaboration between that organization, the CIA, and a number of others. How do we not know that all of our information, all of our the work that we do on all our files isn't just being shifted about there?
Thanks for the interesting question and for your remarks about CSE being trusted. I think in our context, we've had a very close relationship with our Five Eyes partners and our international allies in that space for a very long time, 70 years. And the reason for that alliance is because of a shared set of values around things like protecting democratic institutions and a trusted alliance between our countries. We have conventions in the intelligence context that we don't target each other's citizens, and a long history with them of ensuring that we have privacy protection measures that are afforded to each other's citizens as well as to our own. So in the intelligence space, that's a long-standing practice, and it continues today.
And just very quickly, I chose United States, which is the largest, I think, group that would have the capabilities of doing whatever. But of course, the Chinese are not far behind, and we've recently heard some disturbing reports of somebody help me, Hanu or whatever. Wherewithal. Yeah. Wherewithal. And those are, I think, more the issues that Canadians are somewhat concerned about. I know I certainly am. And so, you know, what do we have in our defense mechanism to guard us from that type of foreign attack?
If you allow me, this goes to the security end of our organization. So maybe piling on a little bit on what Dan has said about the team and the size of the team. The Power 2500 is really the Power 2500 plus our Five Eyes colleagues. And that helps you scale when you're facing foreign threats of different kinds and all kinds. We do work very closely together. We share the advice and guidance. We share the perspectives on where the threats, what the threats are and the methods that they use and what to do about it. On specifics of countries or technologies, of course there will be moments where within the Five Eyes we might have different views and different opinions. But that's to be expected because we're from different nations and we have different sovereign rights and we have different organizations and we have different systems, in fact, and different presence already. So where you see perhaps some discussions between us, our situation is different, we take different measures. But at the end of the day, around the table, when we sit down and look at a similar scenario, we always come up to the same conclusion. So where there might be some differences on the surface, I assure you that where it matters, at the deep end, we actually are very closely aligned. And we've been for 70 years.
Mr. Good?
30 secondes, ça va être court.
This will be short. The security of confidential information in Canada is very important. Your cell phone, for example, cellular data, emails. But a couple of years ago, I was in Florida, and there was a public directory on a given platform. I typed my name and address to see if I was on there, and all my cell phone numbers appeared. All my email addresses appeared. So it's all very well to say things are secure in Canada, and they may be in Canada, but Canadians' information abroad is not secure. What can we do about it? If I take the example you give, it's like the old white pages, yellow pages that used to be available. There are different levels of information. If your information appeared on the internet, then it's all over the world. It appears on servers all over the world. If you had done the same research in Canada, you probably would have found the same thing. What's private is what's actually on your cell phone, information you haven't shared. But we come back to the previous question rather. We have to be careful when we share information, read user agreements, and understand what we are committing to.
Mr. Bayless.
Thank you, Chair. Monsieur Durocher, you said that you did an investigation into Google. What did you investigate? And you said that they made a commitment to stop doing something. So what were they doing that they committed to stop doing?
Sure. So basically the investigation was focused on search advertising, and display advertising. Overall, we looked at 7 potential theories of anti-competitive harm as to how competition may be hindered or Google's actions were Ravings rivals' costs. On the balance of the evidence, we only concluded that there was one of those theories that warranted taking action, and it essentially had to do with what's called the AdWords API terms and conditions. So it's a rather technical issue, but advertisers in the digital economy, sometimes they have to manage campaigns across different platforms, and essentially the inclusion of certain terms in that prevented advertisers from doing so effectively and using Google's rivals. So this was dealt with a 5-year commitment that was provided not to introduce these terms and conditions into Canada. And I should point out that the Federal Trade Commission, which is our sister agency in the United States, had previously done a review and found the same issue as well.
My concern is that the European Union, as was already mentioned, their commissioner that takes care of anti-competition, Marguerite Vestager, fined Google and fined them $3.6 billion. And I'll quote her, "Google abused its market dominance as a search engine by promoting its own comparative shopping service in its search results and demoting those of competitors." So in Europe, first of all, this sounds like anti-competition activity by our rules too. Did you investigate this?
So it's an excellent question. That's why it's important to recognize that the competitive dynamics are not the same across countries necessarily. So the European Commission has two decisions relating to Google. The one you mentioned relating Google Shopping did not figure prominently in our review because the nature of the service that was introduced in Canada was really 2016 is when it came in. The introduction of these services are not the same across countries. So that's why when we explore what other agencies are doing, we have to recognize that the nature of the services offered and the competitive dynamics are not necessarily the same as in Canada.
What Google was doing in Europe, you're saying they were not doing in Canada, or did we not have the laws to stop them from doing in Canada?
I would say the evidence suggested it did not raise an issue under our laws.
Okay, that means that they could be doing the exact same thing in Europe as they're doing here, but in Europe it's bad enough that they get fined $3.6 billion, and here we say, well, they're not affected by a law. Is that what I understand?
Well, we're an evidence-based agency, and I would suggest that the evidence as it pertains to countries in Europe is not the same that we would consider here, nor the commercial realities of
laws are structured or such that the exact same thing could be happening in Europe and here, but in here it's no problem. There it's a $3.6 billion fine.
I would say not necessarily. If there were evidence that what Google was doing here was falling offside of our abuse of dominance provision, I can assure you we would take action.
I want to talk about our abuses there.
Yeah.
Like, very specifically, what happened in Europe, was it done here, would they be offside and would they get a big fine like that? Yes or no? It's a simple question.
I can't hypothesize as to what they did in Europe and whether the same could apply here, because it's
okay. It's okay if you haven't.
We are driven by the evidence.
How many anti-competition fines get in that kind of an order? 3.6 billion. There can't be like dozens of them that you can't look into it. So, but your bureau has not taken the time to look and see what are they doing there? Are they doing the same thing here? I mean, they're a global company. It's a global search engine. While we hold that thought, I think, Mr. Santer, you said the bank thought that our policies could be modernized. That was one of your statements. How so? What should we be looking at to modernize?
Okay. So that was a general statement, which is to say, as the economy evolves and as digitalization proceeds, it's not our responsibility, but simply to say that as new types of competition come up with using new technologies, it would be useful. It would be certainly, it would be reasonable to expect that we would need to consider how to best modernize our practices in order
to... You believe it should be. What should we do?
That would be really the responsibility of the Competition Bureau and the legislation to determine, but rather just simply what I was saying was to say that as the economy evolves, we'll need to evolve all our practices as well to understand how competition is being affected by big data, because this is something that's new.
My concern here is that I see something of this magnitude going on, and that's just one of the things I've learned they're up to. I've heard other people have made major complaints about them using their search engine to direct the users in one direction that financially benefits them and financially hurts their competition. I've read another one about someone that developed a much better search engine, which they effectively killed. So they've done a lot of this activity, and I cannot believe that it's only been happening in Europe. Or if it is only happening in Europe, I don't believe it. I'm concerned that our laws are not allowing you to do your job. That's what I'm trying to ask Mr. Durocher.
Thanks. Thanks. Unfortunately, we're well past the 5-minute mark, but thank you, Mr. Bayliss. And the last 3 minutes go to Ms. Matheson.
Well, thank you. I guess the logical thing is to say, do our laws allow you to do your job?
Thank you. I think it's important to say yes. I think Canadians can take comfort that we are taking all steps necessary to vigorously investigate and take action when warranted. But the underlying premise needs to be we make principled evidence-based decisions. We cannot have theory dictate our actions under the Competition Act. And I would suggest to this committee that that is a very important takeaway. Were any of these digital giants engaging in conduct that is meant to harm competitors, that can very well raise issues under the Competition Act, and these are the types of issues that we would investigate. But the evidence needs to bring us there.
Okay, thank you. And I think in regard to Warawa, that was part of what we heard, that they were indeed harming Canadian companies. And in the case of Warawa, it was Nortel, which is gone now. I also wanted to ask, do you think that the built-in encryption, the backdoors risk permanently compromising encryption to the bad actors?
Sorry, just to clarify, backdoor. Could you expand on backdoors?
Well, are the bad actors able to access the built-in encryption systems? Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I can say, and Andre, please jump in if you'd like, but certainly when we observe things in foreign intelligence space, we do find nation states and other actors make use of vulnerabilities in software in order to defeat things like encryption and gain access to communications that should otherwise be protected. We notify when we see this in a foreign space. We'll provide information of that type to our colleagues in the Cyber Centre and in other agencies in Canada to take action, which might include providing mitigation advice, notifying vendors to make sure that those backdoors are dealt with.
Okay. And perhaps one last question. In the description about the Russian penetration of the American election system and the Netherlands, it was indicated that these were low-level characters. This was not such a sophisticated bunch doing this. What happens when the more sophisticated bunch come along? You talked about best practices and what you called a hygiene guide. And I wondered if you could explain who's using that guide and how is it effective? Can we count on it based on the fact that human beings are involved? And should we take comfort from the hygiene guide?
Absolutely. So part of the challenge for the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity is developing advice and guidance for all people operating in the cyber environment. One key element of the cyber environment is you and I and everybody, the users of that environment. The cyber hygiene guide, the advice on how to use mobility, there's a body of knowledge that you can find on our website that also gets shared through Get Cyber Safe campaigns and other campaigns. That is specifically targeting measures, simple measures that everyone can take that give the most benefit for a few actions. So when we write the advice and guidance, we do it in the spirit of, with a few simple actions, getting the most benefit in security terms.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So I have a few questions, and I wanted to start with you, Mr. Rogers, and a really simple one. Political parties get their backs up when we talk about potentially bringing them under a regulatory framework with respect to privacy or data protection practices. And I'm glad you've given advice to all Canadian political parties. My question is not so much from a privacy protection standpoint, but from the ensuring best data management practices. And when I attend a parliamentary roundtable of representatives in Washington, and Bob Zimmer was there as well, and you have a number of representatives say, two-factor authentication is necessary in today's day and age, and if it's not a rule for political parties, that's a huge problem. When I read your report in June 2017, and you say, I'm not worried about Elections Canada, but I'm worried about political parties and the vulnerability of political parties, and when I read that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were both hacked, and then there was selective distribution of the material from that hacking. It's political parties that need to up their game on data management practices, and shouldn't they be regulated?
I don't think it's a question for us to say what the Canadian government's regulation should be. I think certainly Andre could speak to the types of things that we would suggest that anyone, political parties and others, would take on board if they want good cyber hygiene practices.
Okay, so to put it a different way, do you think it would be better for the protection of our information and for the security of our elections if your advice became a rule?
If I may jump in, based on years of practice, I'll share with you my position with rules. We work in collaboration, as I mentioned, with all participants. People want to secure themselves, all entities, political parties, they genuinely want to do that. And what I've seen, what I've observed is when I work on a model of collaboration and best practices, I reach a certain threshold of actual delivery and outcome. The minute I establish a standard, and there are many standards in production of equipment, tables, chairs, what have you, there's a race to the bottom. People try to meet the minimum standard because there's a competition at play. But best practices are done through collaboration.
Thanks very much. So, Mr. Durocher, in your report, the white paper, it indicates that the purpose of the Act and really the purpose of the review, and when you look at big data, the goal really is ensuring an innovative, efficient, and prosperous economy. And then there's a conversation about substitutability. And it's not just a price. You could talk about quality. And when we had some folks here talking about the worries about antitrust, it was on this point, quite apart from pricing. People are put in a position, as Vanabelle got at this, where when you're forced to deal with a monopoly, and we've got the Bank of Canada suggesting the 5 biggest global tech companies have a market cap of $3.5 trillion US. Certain companies we have to deal with in our day-to-day lives, and there's no choice to be made. There's no we have to give up what we give up to access the service, and so it's not necessarily a price consideration, but there's a quality consideration, and there's part of that quality of service is the data and the privacy that I potentially give up. That was not a big part of the conversation when you were looking at big data in the paper, and I wonder if you could speak to that.
Sure. So that's a great question, great observations, and I can tell you when Professor Maurice Stuckey appeared before this committee, we reviewed the transcript with great interest because we are following what thought leaders such as himself have to say on the matter. So I completely agree that the digital economy, we've moved from what we call static competition to dynamic competition. And static competition is kind of this old world competition on price and output, which is still prominent in a lot of industries across Canada. In the digital space, what we're seeing is companies largely compete for users on the basis of how they're innovating and the offer of their products to consumers. So we call this non-price effects. And this is largely where, when I talk about modernizing the tools that we use for the Competition Act, it's exactly with a view to addressing these issues of non-price effects.
Great. So another thing that was talked about in this in your white paper was a barrier to switching services, and it's not so easy for me to print out everything from Facebook and move it over to another network. And it occurs to me another barrier is network effects, but network effects, as your paper indicates, there are great positive benefits that come from network effects. I don't know what the positive benefit is from the barrier to switching. And I know that when you look at the GDPR and you see a rule of a right to portability, and others have talked about not just a right to portability, but a right to interoperability as well, wouldn't that increase competition?
Yeah, that's an excellent question as well. Data portability of the regulations that we're seeing through the GDPR, I think, is the most noteworthy from a competition perspective, because in theory, it can be pro-competitive, can empower consumers to take their data from one platform to another. Obviously, the devil is in the details as to how that's operationalized, but certainly it's something that we're taking note of. And we're seeing it in the Canadian banking industry, for instance. The Open Banking Initiative, the underlying premise is enabling people to move their data from one service provider to another. So from a competitive perspective, it's certainly very interesting, and it's something that we're monitoring very closely. By the same token, how it's operationalized, we have to watch. And from a competitive perspective, when we look at regulations relating to privacy, another competition consideration involves the cost of compliance, and that the cost of compliance not be so high as to effectively entrench large players and make it more difficult for smaller players to compete when they have this cost of compliance.
And don't you think when you look at those other factors beyond price and privacy is something this committee has obviously been concerned with, but a notion of privacy by default would ensure that companies do have to, it would level the playing field and that unequal bargaining power as between the monopolies, as it were, and an individual consumer. And I don't have to immediately give away all of my privacy rights right from the get-go. And we get at some of those other factors of substitutability beyond price. Do you think that would be a useful conversation for us to have?
you know, I think it certainly could. We would advocate that market forces should drive improvements in all dimensions, including privacy.
Fair. Okay, so, and Mr. Santor, and this is my last question. So, Ms. Wilkins, Senior Deputy Governor, gave remarks February of this year. Data have become another source of monopoly power, and she indicated two concerns. One, it might impact innovation in a negative way. Two, may well return to monopoly pricing in the long run. There may be other concerns. We've certainly heard some other potential antitrust concerns from other witnesses here. She threw out some potential solutions that other people have been talking about, saying how should we regulate ownership and sharing of information, maybe treating tech platforms as utilities. And when we had the CRTC here on net neutrality, they talked about a section that says companies can't unjustly discriminate or give an undue preference or unreasonable preference toward themselves or any person, but including towards themselves, or subject any person to unreasonable disadvantage. And that's to get at equal treatment. And should we regulate Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft? Shouldn't we treat them the same as we do Rogers and Bell?
That's a question beyond the mandate of
suggested utilities, though, treating them sort of similar to utilities.
So I think that that question is best discussed in by those who have the expertise to decide whether or not the competition effects that we can. The benefits of digitalization need to be fully realized. Need to ensure that competition is effective, and so we need to be asking these questions. And I think it's an open question of how best to do that. And I would defer to my colleagues.
Well, thanks very much. And the only thing I would say, I'm very glad that Ms. Wilkins raised the concerns and identified the problem. If she happens to have any solutions she wants to offer, she's welcome to propose them. Okay, so I think, does anyone else have any questions? We've got, Mr. McCard with a question, Mr. Baylis with a question, and Ms. Matheson, and I think we'll...
Pour Madame Gendron, dans le vue,
For Ms. Gendron, you answered regarding your ability to act in view of transparency and keeping to promises made in contracts. Are there any things you would like to recommend to the committee, for example? Would you like to say if is omission part of misleading? Are there any aspects of what you do that could be amended to improve your investigative capacity? Thank you. As my colleague said, the Competition Bureau's mandate is not to deal with policy. That is the department's job. With the resources we have, we think about major issues. We see where we can have the most impact. We're very confident with our current legislation. But as for upcoming changes, that is up to the department. We look at application and doing the most with what we have. We target investigations that will have the most impact on Canadians. For the CSC, given your understanding of threats, do you make a distinction between the industrial quantity of data that's now found on social media and that in fact confuse people who no longer know what to think, where to think, and what to read, which in fact is tantamount to propaganda, or direct attacks like hacking? Is there a different sort of threat which is like hacking and which does come under your responsibility? As a government, we need to be able to take action appropriately. We can't impinge on anyone's right to say what they like, however much we may disagree with it. But if they do something they're not supposed to do, then we can act. Do you make a distinction between those things?
Intelligence side of that question, and that is to say that regardless of the methods, whether it's hacking, sending disinformation, whatever technique, for instance, a foreign government or organization that would seek to do Canada harm, we would be interested in that so long as it is a government intelligence priority. So from the foreign intelligence side, both of things may be distinct, but we would be interested in either. From a response point of view, Andre, did you want to comment on that?
Oui, ce que j'ajouterais, c'est que
Yes, I would add, as you say, we look at the threats, we look at the methods that are being used to manifest that threat, but our focus is confidentiality, security, and availability of networks and network systems. We are not responsible for the content of the information. We just want to make sure that information is protected or conveyed, transmitted safely and securely.
We got a few minutes, and we want to finish up by 12:50 so that we can go on camera to discuss some committee business.
Mr. Rogers, in your presentation, you're looking at cyber threats to Canada's democratic process. We just had Aggregate IQ, a Canadian-based company, busily interfering with the UK Brexit vote and we believe also the Trump presidential vote, the American presidential vote that President Trump won. They were using stolen data, Facebook stolen data. Are they captured in what you investigate, or are you only outward looking? Because if they're sitting here in Canada and they're interfering with other people, we'd be foolish to believe that tomorrow they're not going to turn around and interfere with their own. But is there limits on what you can investigate? Because I'm quite bothered that we have a Canadian entity actively interfering and snubbing their nose at our committee even as they do it.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. I mean, it is a part of our lawful mandate to look only at foreign threats outside of Canada. So a Canadian company engaging in any type of behavior would not be within our mandate in the foreign intelligence side to investigate. There may be other entities in Canada that would be within their mandate. I can't speak to that, but CSIS, RCMP, and others have more of a domestic focus than we do.
Do they, if I understand it, you're the chief of Foreign Signals Intelligence. Is that the catchword for cyber security? Is that
that's our foreign intelligence collection apparatus within CSE. So Andre is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Operations on the cyber side. That's the center that will respond to cyber threats and advise. We do the intelligence collection that might inform their activities and other activities in government.
Do you interface with other foreign entities that are also looking at themselves getting hacked? So did Americans or British people contact yours to coordinate specifically with respect to what AIQ is up to?
The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity is in fact one of many such national centres. So we work very closely with the similar centres in the Five Eyes, but also with the centres around the world. Part of the center also is the national CERT, so the national element that does emergency response teams, which is part of a global network. So what you have is layers of cybersecurity practitioners working together and sharing where they can information that's relevant for their mandates.
Who in Canada should be dealing with AIQ and what they've been up to?
On the basis of what you've said, which was the basis of stolen information, this would be an RCMP mandate.
What they've claimed is that they built the software that they never touched the data. That's a finesse argument that they said that they never had access. They didn't touch the data, they said, or they had small pools of data. They were very careful to massage around it, but clearly they built the programs, the software, they used the data to actively interfere, and they did break certain other rules in the UK. We know about that. But the RCMP, do they have a cybersecurity to look at it from a stolen data perspective? But what about looking at it from simply interfering with the democratic process? Two separate things. One is saying, okay, you stole something. The other thing is what you're doing with the stolen.
And briefly, we'll leave a couple minutes for Ms. Matheson as well.
So very briefly, when the Cyber Center receives a call of a victim, information stolen, identity stolen, we direct that call to the RCMP, and they have the authority and the mandate to do that, to take action.
Thanks very much. And Ms. Matheson for a couple of minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you for all of this information. I did have a question in regard to the tech giants. Most of them are American, and they wield substantial influence beyond the U.S. border. We know that. I wonder, should the monopoly power of these tech giants be addressed in international trade agreements in which the U.S. or any parent country is a participant? And if so, how would you go about it?
I'm happy to answer that. You know, ultimately, competition law, we deal with transborder companies all the time. We review conglomerate mergers. Certainly in the tech space, a lot of decision-making and relevant information is outside of Canadian borders. Critical for us is to have access to that and to have jurisdiction over that. With respect to trade agreements, I think that's beyond our mandate. I'm not well placed to opine on that. What I can tell you is we have excellent relationships with our foreign counterparts who enforce their respective antitrust laws, and we're constantly communicating with one another.
Okay, thank you. And I wondered, should there be things built in, and you may not be able to answer this, built into these trade agreements, because the reality is that parliamentarians, and by extension the citizens that we serve, they don't have access to the text of trade agreements until, or even not after the government is ratified. So should there be greater transparency? Do you need to know? Do we need to know more?
So the Competition Bureau has an international group that participates in trade agreements, and a lot of trade agreements have competition chapters. So the new USMCA has a competition chapter in it that is largely geared towards ensuring the sound exchange of information between agencies to enable them to work collaboratively and to do their jobs. Because I said, a lot of antitrust is international in scope. You have international cartels, conglomerate mergers that are notifiable in dozens and dozens of countries, and business conduct that can be international in scope as well. So really, our job is to make sure that we maintain those relationships and that we're communicating with one another, given how international the activity is.
Thanks very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you to all of our witnesses here. And if you do have additional thoughts that you want to share with the committee on this subject, please submit them in writing. And with that, we'll suspend for a couple of minutes to clear the room, and we'll come back to deal with some committee business.